War in World War II was decided not in fleeting moments of glory, but in the long, merciless hours of endurance. On the front lines, bullets and grenades mattered less than the struggle to keep each soldier upright when exhaustion dragged at every limb. 72 hours on the march turned every step into a test. Sweat and filth caked into uniforms, hands shook uncontrollably, and sleep was chased away only by bitter coffee, fear, and sheer desperation. You've heard stories about the band of brothers. Here's the rest. The cots never meant for resting. The hands trembling so hard you couldn't even light a cigarette. What kept men upright? Every dirty, desperate trick World War II could conjure. This story drags heroism out of the parades and shoves it face down in the mud, where it always belonged. These are the brutal methods soldiers used just to stay conscious when sleep, survival, and sanity all went to war. Not all war wounds bleed. Fatigue ate at soldiers more than bullets ever could. Nights stretched out like an endless wound, black, gnawing, alive with artillery and the hiss of whispered orders from a mouth that hadn't tasted sleep in days. There were no miracles, no kindly quartermasters handing out blankets. Only one way through: outlast the enemy and outlast your own body. The command came down. No rest. Not tonight, not in this foxhole, not through this march. Eyes propped open with muddy fingers, men learned the truth. Sleep is mercy, and war gives none. On every front, soldiers became experts in the art of not giving in, even as exhaustion tried to claim them with every passing hour. The tricks weren't in training manuals. Caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines, and whatever horror passed for coffee. Each ration a counterfeit promise of another hour upright. Sometimes, even those failed. This is not a saga of courage against all odds. It's a death match between the human body and what generals and fate demanded of it. It started with orders. March all night, dig in, watch for sentries. In the Ardennes, men froze in slit trenches, jaws clenched so tight their teeth cracked, too scared to blink. Wakefulness was less a blessing, more a sentence. Sleep was the forbidden fruit, and every minute awake grew more bitter. The enemy wasn't the only danger. Fatigue crept in silently, a saboteur of every step and thought. A soldier on his feet for 3 days straight chased shadows, stared into nothing, mistaking wind for footsteps and sometimes freezing under the weight of half-dreams. Commanders didn't care. Rest meant retreat. Retreat meant defeat. Men learned to fight the clock with their bodies. Some muttered to themselves. Others took up pacing, stomping circles in the slush until their boots bled. To nod off on guard duty could mean a bullet, if not from the enemy, then from your own officer's sidearm, delivered for criminal negligence. Huddled in shell holes or pushing through column after column of mud and wire, sleep turned traitorous. The real orders ignored courage and marksmanship. Every heartbeat became a single command: stay awake. In the desert, sand whipped sleep from eyes as thoroughly as a slap. The jungle replaced it with fear, mosquitoes, leeches, the hot futility of trying to rest beside a corpse. There was no safe hour, no true night. The clock slithered forward, and men got mean. Every private became a specialist in cheating sleep, inventing new rituals, turning wakefulness into the only routine left when the rest of life had dissolved into chaos. By the third day, delirium crept up. Some men built little shrines out of ration tins or prayed aloud just to keep their brains from unspooling. Nothing worked for long, and nothing worked twice. But in a war that measured success by the man-hours, a soldier could stay upright and alert. That defeat belonged to the lucky. Here's the myth: hot food, strong coffee, and a smoke meant morale. Here's the reality: half-burned grounds and cigarettes sucked to the filter, rationed like morphine, became the line between staying awake and collapsing face first into the mud. Black coffee was more than drink. It was lifeblood poured from battered tins, grounds chewed straight when the pot disappeared, sometimes brewed with water filthier than the socks used to strain it. American GIs measured comfort in spoonfuls, scraping the bottom for one more jolt, tearing at each other for the last miserable cup. On some nights, a shared sip was all that kept silence from swallowing up an entire patrol. Cigarettes did the rest, not a luxury, but a currency of fatigue. Packs were passed out by the crate, each one a filthy stamp of government sanction. Doctors would have gagged to see the boys on the line swap brands, children swearing by a Lucky Strike or rolling their own from scrounged tobacco, and the wrappers from used-up rations. Boots learned fast. Keep a smoke for sunrise, another for the march, two for the hell that came when the adrenaline wore off. The taste turned to ash after the second night. Smoke poisoned lungs, but it throttled back sleep, giving nerves something to chew on. No one pretended it was healthy. No one cared. In chow lines and checkpoint shivers, the cigarette was the last word between the living and the delirious. The truth is, no field manual prescribed this dependence. Coffee and cigarettes were the open secrets, the sanctioned vice, the legal drug. Commanders understood that without them, their men might lie down and never get up. That battered cup and crumbling butt delivered one promise: a little more time, a little more fight. Everyone paid, later. Teeth cracked, lungs burned, the shakes set in. But there was always another patrol, another sleepless night, waiting to be smoked and sipped into submission. Rations gave out. Willpower broke. The army stepped in with chemistry. Enter Benzedrine and Pervitin, peddled by officers with the same matter-of-fact brutality as they distributed bullets or punishment. This wasn't rogue experimentation. Military doctors dissolved Benzedrine in water or handed out white tablets by the bottle, promising alertness and stamina. What they meant was madness, high-strung energy that masked exhaustion and made discipline possible for men approaching their breaking points. The longer the campaign, the deeper the price. Addiction was rampant. Some soldiers needed more pills just to keep hands from shaking. Some crashed into comas when supply ran out. Records show Army doctors facing a new dilemma: keep dosing men past the breaking point or risk mutiny by letting them collapse. No guidance, just grim arithmetic. How many more marches could be bought on borrowed sleep? In the barracks, the myth survived that pills made a hero. The truth: they only made exhaustion wait its turn. No one wrote poetry about Benzedrine. No statues honor the men crushed by a chemical promise. It was survival by subtraction. Subtract sleep, subtract self, subtract memory. What remained was just enough awareness to keep fighting. That was the line generals asked their boys to walk, every waking hour ripping away the margin for collapse. A man alone drifts. With a partner, he stays alert. The buddy system served survival first. One man's fatigue became the other's problem. Partners kicked boots, slapped necks, barked nonsense questions just to hear the other mumble in reply. If you let your friend doze, the whole squad risked death. A dozing sentry, a sabotaged patrol, a lull in vigilance, and the cost came due in blood. Micronaps, the last line of cheating nature. Lean against a muddy wall, close your eyes for 15 seconds, wake with a start. In foxholes, men draped arms over knees and trained themselves to jerk awake at the faintest sound. Sometimes their own teeth chattering, sometimes a shell landing just far enough away to be ignored. Armies neither encouraged nor banned these catnaps. The doctrine was survival. Someone always watched, while another courted unconsciousness for a heartbeat or two. Misery loves company. Every waking hour, one man's breakdown became the stuff of rumor. Don't let Jonesy nod off, saw him swaying by the wire. Officers handed out assignments in pairs for a reason. Twin eyes doubled the chances of catching a tired mistake before it became a fatal one. Sometimes the price was humiliation. Fall asleep in the wrong place, take a butt stroke to the ribs, or worse. The buddy system outlived the war. Veterans told stories about the man who kept them awake on the worst nights. No flowery reunion speeches, just grudging respect. Brotherhood forged under the gun of mutual fatigue had little to do with love. It grew from shared paranoia, the last defense when trust in one's own body failed. Coffee gone? Cigarettes burned through? Men had to get creative. The front was a laboratory for desperation. Chew raw coffee grounds. Pinch earlobes until crimson. Spit on your hands. Slap your own face. Run your tongue down rusted tin just to taste something alive. Soldiers learned to dribble cold water down their shirts for an icy jolt, a trick that worked but for minutes, soon replaced by biting the inside of a cheek hard enough to bleed. Marching songs filled the night, not to boost morale, but to keep brains sputtering above the fog. Rhythms drowned out the ache, kept limbs moving while the mind tucked itself into corners edged with fantasy. Newcomers thought it silly until an hour before dawn, when music became the last thread tying a squad to reality. The uninitiated scoffed at tales of men counting bugs, reciting multiplication tables, chanting childhood prayers just to keep from collapsing. Some tricks were borrowed from folklore. Soviet troops tucked sharp pebbles in their boots to stave off drowsiness. British soldiers whispered riddles in the dark. Germans fiddled with broken watches to keep fingers occupied and minds baffled. Any sensory pain beat the velvet drift into sleep. Smart or heroic, the trick didn't claim either label, but it worked, at least until the next bad hour swallowed it whole. War didn't care where the hack came from. A tip passed down a line could mean a man stumbled through another checkpoint instead of falling on his face. Someone always had a new idea, and someone else always tried it out of sheer terror. The trenches reeked of rivalry over who had the best wake-up hack, and silent mourning for those it didn't save. Morale, supply, and madness changed by language and geography. American dog faces clung to their GI coffee, coaxed flavor from boiled socks, and measured sanity in how many Lucky Strikes remained in a battered carton. The British nursed tea, spiked with bits of cigarette ash, drank cold when fire drew too much attention. Officers dropped sugar or condensed milk into the mix, and the resulting slurry passed for comfort from North Africa to Normandy. Germans ran on Pervitin, the miracle amphetamine that let the Wehrmacht storm through the Low Countries in 3-day sprints, jittering on nerves, trading sleep for speed. Letters from the Ostfront talked less about comradeship, more about the madness that came after the last pill was gone. Supplies determined spirit. Allies distributed stimulants with careful hands, Axis powers with abandon. Where supplies failed, discipline took over. Soviets stretched out tasks, rotated posts, sometimes brawled over the chance to rest. Their hacks were less chemical, more cruel. Dousing faces in sleet, bathing wounds in vodka, biting down on frostbitten hands just to verify they were still awake. Official doctrine turned into rumor overnight. One captain let men sleep 40 minutes at a stretch. Another denied rest until 3 collapsed. Across all fronts, deprivation bred its own rituals. Scavenged sweets, makeshift games, rations divided, and stories exchanged from farmhouses to foxholes. Each army clung to its own ground rules. Some, like the Americans, called it discipline. The Soviets called it endurance. The Germans, obsession. But everywhere, sleeplessness became the true universal experience of war. What broke men in one army produced dark humor in another. Germans mocked Allied coffee armies. Americans traded stories about Pervitin zombies on the other side. Everybody lost. 3 days upright changes a man. Hallucinations swept through the dark like enemy patrols, faces of dead friends, voices whispering in languages never learned. Hands stopped obeying, feet turned to stone. Sometimes, a man's eyes rolled back in his skull, but his body kept moving, dragged along by panic or by another's grip on his jacket. Talking descended into muttering, then into hoarse, angry threats at nothing. Medics watched the worst cases with detached pity. Men who'd gone too long without rest twitched, vomited, even bit through their tongues. Some had to be restrained to keep from running straight into gunfire, anything to escape the nightmare their own brains spun out of exhaustion and rot. Officers learned to send shell-shocked privates for deep sleep therapy, barbiturates, blackout tents, fasting until the body snatched back a few hours of REM. Sometimes the cure worked. Sometimes it broke the soldier wide open, past the point of return. When it ended, when October's chill finally let a squad stumble into a barn, or when the first shift in months granted a real bunk and a merciful hour of quiet, no one cheered. Survivors traded dull, leaden stares. Jokes fell flat. Mess halls went silent as food lost its taste. Cigarettes burned to numb hands rather than frayed nerves. Insomnia stuck around, sometimes for life. To sleep again offered no comfort, only surrender. Men who outlasted the marathon paid dearly. Some wrote baffled letters home. Some never spoke of those nights at all. Generals shrugged. Fresh bodies always replaced the spent. But for the men who kept watch while the world slept, the price of war looked less like glory and more like an endless clock ticking down the seconds to the next lost night. Here's the part the history books skip. Bravery wasn't loud. Survival looked like filthy men weeping in the dawn light, fingers scraped raw from clutching rifles, the taste of burnt coffee and old tobacco hanging in the air. They did not conquer sleep so much as hold it off, one brutal trick at a time, until the next whistle, the next shell, the next impossible order. Modern comfort is an insult to what these men traded for another hour alive. Debate heroism all you want. None of it changes the ruin left in the bodies and minds of men who paid their courage in hours stolen from sleep. Heroics rot. What lasts is the memory of staring down another night, knowing every trick is just another way to drag yourself and your friend through till dawn.